everything is an experience. And as long as you have an experience and you care about that experience and how do people engage with you, then you could benefit from the services of a UX designer or a product designer. There's two key traits that will help you pretty much throughout your career, and these are independent of company or industry. One is curiosity. So you have to be curious. You have to really be super interested of looking under the hood, of understanding complex systems, of really trying to understand how something works. Always understand your priorities. What's next? What do you want to do now? What do you want to do in 5 years' time? What do you want to do in 10 years' time? Open mind, attend conferences, attend different meetups, and try and meet people and ask them questions about their specific role and industry.
Hi, Radu. Thank you again for coming back. Today, we want to get your opinion and just share your wisdom on the UX job. Like traditional UX job is mainly on the tech industry. That's the first thing people think of UX. My assumption is there were so many industries you can experiment, give you much more opportunities to try your different fields with the same job title. Product manager or something, or software engineering, their software would change and there's but whereas UX with the same skill, you're just like an actor, like able to try out different roles and different situations. So I'm assuming you mentioned in the episode you work in an agency and with multiple projects with different industries. First of all, I want you to, if you can give us some intro on your experience working very briefly.
Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you for having me, Yash. So, in terms of the subject for today, I've been a designer and working in a creative job for about 15 years now. About 7, probably even 8 years of that have been focused specifically on UX and the various aspects of the UX kind of job. And also, because UX overlaps quite a lot with product and sometimes they're interchangeable, you could say that I've worked on many products or digital products over the years. And in terms of the different industries, my current role right now is with a Dublin agency that is quite big at the moment. So it's about 160 people. And what we currently do is we work across pretty much every single industry and sector that you can imagine. So we have clients from the likes of FinTech or pharma to communications, like mobile communication, to different networks, renewable energy, and e-commerce and so on. So the list can probably go on and on. And one thing I realized in this time was that even though it might be called different names, the requirements from the UX specialists, they're somehow somewhat overlapping across all these industries and products. And when we say UX, of course, we refer to the user experience or the product designed side of things. How do you bring a product to market and the complete journey up until that product becomes a live thing? So I think just across that, we just need to understand that even though people might call it differently or they might say they need a specific part of the UX process, they usually mean or want to say or express the same thing, right? So I think we're probably going to look into a bit more detail as to what that might be, probably as we go through this questions and focus for today, right?
So basically, you mentioned the product, they may call it UX, but sometimes, even in the episode when you have said like it's an umbrella term, sometimes they focus on interaction, sometimes business side, like strategy and those stuff. So, isn't it related? At the end of the day, they have a specific skill stack for UX, right? They can say interaction, like UI, but irrespective, you're say a designer, digital designer, you have this skill set, maybe different titles and different combinations, they call it. But is it like purposely tech related job? Because that's the biggest thing, right? UX, IT, and tech. Is that true? Is that myth true? True.
Okay, it's probably not. And my understanding is that UX and user experience does not really just belong to the tech industry. So you don't necessarily need a user interface at all for user experience. In some cases, the user experience could be a B2B, so business to business model. where your users are actually other companies purchasing a product from you, and they can purchase maybe it's a software stack, could be a SaaS company, or maybe it's something completely different, like a service for folding molecules in pharma, right? So they might purchase a service from a pharma company, right? Which doesn't necessarily need to be tech or considered as tech, right? Even though they might have technology. So I think the job of a UX designer is probably relevant in a whole lot of industries outside of tech. If it's called this way or if it's understood as a user experience, I'm not 100% sure, because it really depends on the company and it depends on how they have structured their teams and the job titles. But I think ultimately everything is an experience. And as long as you have an experience and you care about that experience and how do people engage with you, then you could benefit from the services of a UX designer or a product designer.
So my question would be, so in my career life, I want to like not to be fixed to tech industry. Or I just every 5 years I want to be able to change the industry. So if someone want to be that flexible and skilled, have a confidence to handle this type of situation. So what are the core skill set that person have to develop for that one?
Yeah, very interesting question. Also, I'll try and keep the answer brief. It is a very big question. I think we could probably have a conversation just on this topic for a complete episode, if not several. So, in terms of skills, if you want to migrate from a one industry to the next or to another industry that might be quite different, I think what you need to understand is that there are indeed some skills that are very much the same across the whole spectrum, right? And it doesn't really matter what the industry you're on. For example, if you have done qualitative research, like user interviews, they're probably the same methodology applies across different industries. So it doesn't really matter what industries you worked on as long as you know how to do quantitative research. The same with qualitative research or quantitative, sorry. So in terms of quantitative research, surveys or any kind of a usability testing tools might stay the same. And you might be using some very standard tools, which again transfers from one industry to another. In terms of knowledge and how you get different things done, that's probably the biggest difference. Because, like you mentioned, if you're working in insurance or pharma and you want to move to renewable energy or tech in general, I think you might find some roadblocks there, and probably the biggest roadblocks would be just along the lines of how do you convey the transferable skills that you have or you have acquired and the knowledge you have acquired into from one industry to the next. Probably one of the first questions, if let's say you applied and you created your very custom application to specific to that industry or that job you're trying to get, and let's assume you got an interview. One of the first questions you're going to get is probably going to be, why is it that you're trying to move from there to here? Right? So you need to make sure you have a good answer. You need to make sure you understand first to yourself, you can explain it, then to your friends, and then to somebody that really wants to know why would you be the most qualified person, right? Of course, you can focus on answers just along the way of diversity, right? Because you come with a different mindset. So you need to find the specific parts that maybe overlap between those two industries and try and see them through the perspective of the industry you're applying for. And try and see if there is an overlap, can you emphasize that and how can you emphasize that? For example, if you have worked in insurance and you do quite a lot of dashboards that might be used by B2B, and you move to renewable that also uses dashboards and they're probably used by internal employees trying to understand the different aspects of the renewable sector, how can you find the points in common? How can you find the transferable elements that you can focus on and explain? Your main focus would be to make sure that you emphasize the overlap, not so much the difference. And at the end, conclude with the fact that they're actually, in fact, not that different. But you can still bring a different perspective because you understand a problem to a very deep level and you can apply some level of knowledge from there and apply it and solve new problems in a new industry in a different way. So that's the first thing. And of course, you mentioned quite a few times that you're almost like an actor. You present yourself and you use the acting skills for whatever movie you're playing in or whatever stage you're
Hmm.
performing on. So some roles might be comedies and some roles might be dramas, and each and one of them require a very specific set of skills. So I think for a UX designer, your focus should be on keeping your skills broad enough and also always expanding. So you make sure you stay up to date in terms of what some specific industry might be using. Maybe dashboards require a lot of testing in terms of usability testing, or maybe they require A B testing. So try and find out the types of methodologies that you need to know to operate in that industry, and then try and focus on developing those skills if you don't have them. So I think that's probably a very short overview of the kind of things you could do when you're transitioning from a an industry into a different one.
It may be you'll be getting into this industries to experiment or for your own curiosity as a contractor or mostly freelancer. It's okay for person who has some sort of experience and confidence, like mid to senior or senior, then it's, I'm assuming that's the right time. But a person from a graduate level who is curious, what should be she aware of, especially if she's going to a company or a startup where the UX maturity is one or below one, like a freelancer or contractor. Is it a good idea for them to do it?
It depends. If you're a very curious person and you just want to experiment with different industries before you decide which one you actually enjoy working in, it might not be a bad idea to actually
Mhm.
try and do a freelance job or a project specific job in that industry or in a company that operates in that industry. So I think that's a fantastic idea because it gives you direct exposure. You understand the kind of things that you need to understand before making that decision. And then you can make an informed decision. But before you get there, I think what you need to make sure you have is make sure you understand that industry's language, terminology, the kind of things that you need to be aware of, just so when you're having a conversation with the hiring manager in that company, they feel like you understand what they're saying, right? So make sure you have your terminology down, the key terms. Make sure you understand if they call something a dashboard, make sure you understand what they mean when they say that. If they're using specific terms to renewable energy, make sure you understand what those are. Make sure you understand the units of measure, the different types of measures and how they're pertinent to that role. So I think the more prep you can do to really do a deep dive and understand that industry and show that you're actually aware of the insides or the maybe the language that they use, that's probably going to play it really well for you because it just shows that you're thinking on your feet, you're curious, and you want to learn. You're eager. You really want to get your hands dirty, so to speak, and understand how you can do things. So there's two key traits that will help you pretty much throughout your career, and these are independent of company or industry. One is curiosity. So you have to be curious. You have to really be super interested of looking under the hood, of understanding complex systems, of really trying to understand how something works. That has to be something that is very deeply ingrained in how you think and how you do things. So that's one. Curiosity is probably a very important trait. And the second one will just be to be a problem solver. Once you're curious and you understand how things work, you don't stop there. You're trying to optimize things. Your mind is always thinking of how you can improve a flow or how you can improve a process and what kind of actions can you take to measure or to benchmark different states and find solutions. Because in some cases, you are talking about very complex systems that might not be easily understood. And what you need to do, you need to do a lot of observation before you can actually make a decision or come back with a solution. So, curiosity and problem solving will probably help you a lot. And this applies to all industries and all companies, and is something very specific and I think very interesting for the UX field. And of course, that's not to say that a developer or a project manager might not be curious or might not be problem solvers. But I think more specifically, as a UX person, you absolutely need to have those two traits.
So I have a like different take on it. For me, my mindset is if I want to progress in career, I better go for like a company that has minimum one or two designers who are senior to me if I want to experiment. Because when you're working as a junior and you're the first designer in the company, you make a lot of mistakes. I think you cost the company a lot because you don't know like how to make the decisions yet. Like you can watch the YouTube videos, you can learn, but the best way you can learn is on the job with someone senior. It will be really hard, like when you're looking at the same design every day. And from a designer perspective, so I'm thinking, would you think agency would be the right approach for a person who's curious, doesn't have much experience, or not confident enough, or what is like a very creative out of the box to like satisfy this curiosity but still experiment under the guidance? So what would
Yeah.
be? Is it an agency only, or do they have other options?
No, I think the question is very good and very interesting from the perspective of where would you get more experience or get exposed to more industries. So I think there's of course advantages and disadvantages to all business models and company industries and perspectives. But overall, I think if you have a very specific interest, so for example, if you want to work in pharma, then you should try and pursue internships or contractor roles with pharma companies and be specific. If you're not really sure if pharma is your thing, an agency might be better because in an agency you will get exposed to pharma and tech in general and apps and websites and law firms and you name it, right? So a large kind of quantity. However, in an agency, you're not going to be able to control the projects you work on because in most cases, whatever the company or the agency has active at that point in time, and you are a great match in terms of skills, that's probably the project you're going to work on, right? So you're not going to be able to pick only pharma or only renewable. So you will go where your skill will take you, and whatever is open and needs your attention, that's what you're going to work on. So that's the other side of the agency, right? You're not as much in control of the projects. And if you want to be more specific and you know what you already are interested in, then you can just go straight to a specific company in that industry, apply, and see what happens. And I think in today's circumstance or job market, I'm not sure if maybe you don't have the luxury of being that specific. Maybe you have to apply for both and see which one happens first or which one happens at all. So I think if you have a certain level of maturity in terms of your UX skills and portfolio, maybe you can be a bit more picky and a bit more specific. If you're at the beginning of your career where your portfolio might not be as strong and maybe you don't have a lot of experience, maybe you just apply for different roles in different types of companies, specific industry or agency, and try and see if one or the other gets you a job. So that's kind of it. And you mentioned as well the aspect of UX maturity. This is the exact same. It could be that you're joining a big company that is very industry specific, and maybe you're the first UX person they hired, or maybe they already have a team of researchers or a product team that already have well established systems. So it is a very important thing to try and assess or understand that UX maturity before you join a company. In an agency, the UX maturity might depend on the client maturity first. So the agency might have system and processes in place and might have a UX team or a product team in place. However, ultimately, it really depends on the maturity of the client and where are they in that journey. And that will definitely shape out the outcomes as well as everything else that follows.
That was an interesting. I had some concerns when they said, I have a job in a company, in a, say, UX Maturity 3, they have a small group of designers. So they said, I'm really curious, but I can't risk my job because I have responsibilities. So I'm assuming they said, will it be okay if I have a full time job and can I take contract jobs? But I have few concerns. I told them it's a startup. It's going to take much more energy. And if you're taking a contract job, don't expect that it would be a small ask. It would be a full time job, but very less play. But you're playing a very huge risky role. And I told them, and I have few concerns. So I suggested, why don't you like keep your main job because you can't afford to experiment with the finances, and why don't you go with the pro bono work? So what would be your suggestion to that person?
Okay. So if you're in a situation where you do want to experiment, right? So this is the whole thing. You reach the point in your career where you're just trying to expand and try and understand other ways of doing business or conducting business and in different markets or industries. So if you currently have a role and you're happy enough in that role, let's say, maybe you're not the happiest, but you're happy enough. Your job, people respect you, you understand what's required, and you can do things fast enough at a reasonable pace without a huge extra mental load for yourself. So if you're in that position, you're in a perfect position to start the side hustle, right? And what we mean by that is to try and see if there's other avenues for you to get exposed to different types of businesses. And in that case, yes, you could try and explore freelancing or contractor, right? As long as you're quite in charge of your time and you can master your doing the two in parallel, because it's not easy. For example, and this is an example I have, I've always been passionate in terms of education. I always enjoyed being in a position where I can teach people the kind of things I learned and maybe the kind of things that I wish I would have learned years ago. Currently, I'm also teaching at IADT and I'm hosting a course, UX Fundamentals, and that kind of runs from October to February. And it's mostly evenings and sometimes Saturdays as well. So in person classes. And I also have the agency job, which is my UX strategy role, and that's my full time role. So I've experimented with this and I've been teaching this course for 4 years now. And I know it works. I know I can do both, even though it requires a bit of time. And again, sometimes it requires weekends, sometimes evenings. I can do both. And that's my way of experimenting with other things I could do without really leaving my full time job. And of course, you have to make sure that your current employer is happy with this arrangement because if you do things that might affect your current role, they might not be as happy. So you always have to keep that conversation open. So that's one way of doing things. You could try and experiment and see what else can you find, what's available, and how can you do it within the restrictions of your current circumstance. And in terms of doing this a different way, right? You could try and see if maybe you can work less hours in your current role. Maybe you can work if you work 5 days, maybe you can reduce that to 4 or 3, and you still have a bit of stability in terms of salary, but you also have the 2 extra days where you can explore other things. That's not very common. I know of a few people that have tried this and they're quite happy with the arrangement. So they get more time with the family. They also work a bit more focused. Then they can do other things like writing a book or creating a course or just trying different things outside of that specific role. So that's the number two. I think you can also go and try and see if maybe through the current job, you have opportunities to connect with companies doing the kind of work that you're interested in. So it might be worth asking in your current job and depending on your relationships with maybe the CEO or the CTO or maybe project managers, if there are any active projects within the industry that you're interested in, or maybe adjacent, even if they're not might not be the same industry, maybe they're adjacent, so they're close enough. And maybe what you can try and be exposed to that industry through your work. So that could be a potential option three. And I'm sure we can probably think of a few other cases, but I don't really have any examples outside of this tree. I can't think of anything practical. But yeah, I'd be curious to see if we can find the fourth or fifth option and see what they might be.
Like I told them, start with pro bono, go and find people, start slow. And they asked me, like, where should I find a pro bono work? So, do you have any suggestions for them?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for pro bono work, there's actually quite a few websites. And I know they're mostly US focused and the projects are running probably on US time. But what you can do, you can basically join a team and you can work as part of that team to deliver a project for a charity, for example. So the work might not be paid, but it might be in an industry, maybe it might be music or it might be something else. And you might be able to pick a project and do that. But it will still mean you need to do work. It just means that you will
Yeah.
have your full time job. And then evenings and weekends, you will still have to dedicate 10 to 20 to sometimes 30 hours a week extra to that other thing you want to do. So
Yeah.
you do have to make sure you align quite a few things. It's not going to be easy. You're probably going to learn a lot, but it's probably better if you join something that is short lived, so a month or two, and don't go into a contract that could be potentially running for months and months because
6 months.
you don't know if that's sustainable for you and mental health and family arrangements and finances and all that.
So, again, coming back to the theme of this episode, we discussed a lot of topics, but I want to know your key takeaways.
Yeah, so we are going back to that same point. I think there might not be a one answer that kind of solves or addresses the same issue for everybody at the same time. So it really depends on how advanced or how skilled you are, how much experience do you have, what previous industries you worked on, and also what would your goals be, your financial status. And I think if you add all those variables up, you will probably end up with multiple ways of doing things. But I think overall, if you try and find what specifically overlaps in terms of methodology or skills, soft skills or hard skills between the industry you're in and the industry you're trying to move to, I think just keeping that in mind, make sure you understand and you emphasize those skills, transferable skills, and so on. And then, as a second step, also make sure that you have a deeper knowledge of the industry you're trying to move to. So, understand the terminology, the language, understand how they measure different things, understand the specific KPIs or maybe specific research methods, or when they say something, what is that thing? So, try and get the vocabulary and understand that on a deeper level. So, do your research first. And then overall, I think from a strategic point of view, in terms of your job search, if you're trying to move from a different industry and try and explore several industries, always understand your priorities. What's next? What do you want to do now? What do you want to do in 5 years' time? What do you want to do in 10 years' time? And this will, if it's clear to you, and even though you might have to make adjustments, at least you know the kind of skills that you might need in the future. So when an opportunity arises to maybe take a course or learn a new skill, maybe you pick one from the list that will get you closer to your plan and your strategic approach to your career. So always think ahead if you can. And as a final point, I would say try and have contact or discussions with people from different industries because there might be industries or business models that you're not aware of and they're fascinating. But just because you don't know they exist, you can't ask questions about them. So keep an open mind, attend conferences, attend different meetups, and try and meet people and ask them questions about their specific role in industry. And you might be surprised in terms of how much intel and how much info you can get from people in that specific field that you might just be discovering or you might be already familiar with and interested in.
So basically, the conclusion, first of all, if you're curious, that's a good thing. And assess your situation realistically. Up to 5 years. It's not like 1 or 2. 5 years. Just see personal life, work life, and financial life. 3 are important. See what's the best strategy. And before you jump the ship or try something so risky, especially finances are involved, start networking. Like speak designers, attend conferences or meetups, like whatever opportunity you get. Try to understand the designers working or like any people working, especially designers would be a good bet to understand what's the business logic, what's the business like models. Then if you are interested in that and based on your skill set, sometimes you always need to improve your skill set. But if you have an opportunity and you really want that opportunity to take, like experiment, see your current skill set. Okay, if they're doing dashboards and they did dashboards, but it's completely different. But try to like basically selling and also convertible skills, identify them and be able to position yourself to get the opportunity. So that's the only way, that's the best way so far we discussed. And yeah, it been an excellent episode. I learned a lot personally. So thank you so much, Radu, and hope we will see you again in the next
Excellent.
episode.
Thank you for having me, Yash.